So, good afternoon. I'm the other neighbor from Hungary, and I would like to give you an overview of what's going on in terms of cycling mobility in Hungary. Yes. I represent Mobilissimus. We are a similar company than Konferencie in Austria. We are sustainable mobility consultants working in different kinds of topics, including sustainable urban mobility planning and public transport planning and cycling projects. We are also active in European projects like Horizon or Interreg. We have a multidisciplinary team. We are not a very big company, but small and flexible. A few references which I'm showing because my presentation will be based on the experiences from this project, especially the ones from the left side, which are cycling network plans on the regional or the county level from different counties in Hungary, but also in Romania. And we also have some network plans for different kinds of cities and micro-regions. This one I presented last year in Vienna, so Mike would know it. We also work on a bit more in depth, like development strategies for cycling routes, or, for example, a feasibility study for a bike sharing system in the Lake Balaton region. So what I would like to talk about is these 4 points. The first is the role of cycling in Hungary. The second is how we stand with infrastructure in terms of cycling. Then some slides about national policies, so what the state is doing in terms of cycling. And finally, but most importantly, our experiences of planning county and regional level cycling networks. So not many people know, but Hungary is number 3 in Europe in terms of the daily usage of cycling. So after the Netherlands and the Denmark, people cycle most in Hungary. And if we look into it a bit deeper, we can see that for like 16% of the people, cycling is their main mode of mobility. These are regular surveys, representative surveys done in Hungary by the Hungarian Cyclist Club. And what is also interesting is the regional distribution. So if you look at this map, you can see that in some regions, almost every third person cycles as their main daily mode of mobility. So what is the reason of these differences? It's not very hard to guess. It is because this part of the country is very flat, so it's really easy to cycle. There are a lot of smaller towns and villages where the distances are not really high. Here I just collected some pictures from Csongrád County, which is in the southeastern part. You can see that we have really different people cycling for different purposes, be it for leisure, be it for going to work or to school, or even to bring to the children to the playground. So in these areas, cycling is really, traditionally, it's really widespread and it's a part of the normal life. Of course, cycling is seasonal, also in Hungary, so in the warmer months, more people cycle than in the winter. On the right side, there is a diagram which shows the correlation between weather, meaning temperatures and precipitation, so rain, and the level of cycling counted in several spots in Budapest, and you can see that it's really very strongly correlated, so people like to cycle when the weather is nice. But despite we have really high levels of cycling, the infrastructure is quite mixed. So we have different kinds of infrastructure like cycleways, mixed-use ways on embankments along the rivers, or this kind of mixed stuff for pedestrians and cyclists, which are sometimes really compromised, or different kinds of cycle lanes on the street. So it's really a mix, and it depends from city to city which one is more preferred. The conditions of infrastructure are also quite mixed, so we have some nice new or renewed infrastructure, but there are also other cases where the infrastructure is neglected. or the maintenance is missing, or maybe the planning was not really cautious enough. As some of the cycleways are already like 20 years old or 15 years old, then the lack of maintenance is already causing problems. In terms of bicycle parking, the picture is also mixed. So there are some really nice parking for bicycles. In this picture, you can see a bicycle parking of a school in Algyő, which shows that the numbers which I showed on the map are real. But there are also, even in new projects, sometimes they install bicycle parking facilities which are not really safe and not really usable for cyclists. It is also possible to combine public transport with cycling, which is a really useful combination because, for example, by train you can cover large distances in a short time and then combine it with the bicycle for the last mile. This is what I did this morning. At different stops, you can have different kinds of bike and ride facilities, be it on a bus station or a tram terminus. I think this one was not really meant to be a bicycle parking, but people use it properly, or at the railway station. And in some cases, even at some very rural bus stops, you can find one or two stands for bicycles, which is, in my view, really useful for the rural people. Another way of combining cycling and public transport is just to transport bicycles on trains. In Hungary, on most trains, it is possible to transport a bicycle. Of course, the capacities are sometimes limited. And on some rural railway lines, it's really hard to find one or two places. So what is the state doing in terms of cycling development? This is a map of the national cycling projects. The green ones are already mostly built or under construction, and the red ones are in the planning phase. What's going on? So maybe as you can see, this one is the Eurovelo 6 along the border with Slovakia. And then we have another Eurovelo 14 coming from Austria along the Lake Balaton and then connecting to Budapest. And it will come this way to the eastern border and maybe continuing to Romania. So these are the two big main projects the state is currently promoting, but of course there are some other smaller sections or connections. Just some pictures about a section of the Eurovelo 6 north of Budapest, or the Eurovelo 14 between Budapest and Lake Balaton. This time it was still not yet fully finished, but now it is already finished. Besides building new cycleways, there is another national project which is about signposting. So not only the dedicated cycling routes can be signposted, but also combinations of different kinds of infrastructure, including low traffic rural roads or embankments along the Danube or the Tisza River. They can have these kinds of signs. It's a new design, and every year some hundreds of kilometers are signposted using this manuals. So lastly, I would like to give some hints about how we do cycle network planning in different counties and regions. The first challenge is when we try to establish the baseline is to collect data about what is the actual infrastructure like. We have two main sources. First, on the left side, we have a national database of cycling infrastructure, which is good to have, and it's the official data. But it has some limitations, as it is only compulsory since 2015 to provide data into the system. So the older cycleways are not always included. And also the new ones are sometimes included quite late, as the municipalities are building cycleways and closing the projects, and then they start to think how to provide data to this system, so sometimes it takes a while, which means that it's not always complete. The other opportunity is using open data, which is OpenStreetMap in our case, which has other limitations. This is based on data from the users, so ordinary people can upload spatial data, which means that it can have some mistake, or sometimes it has to be checked or corrected, but on the other hand, it is freely available, and it can be corrected quite easily, so it's often more up to date. If we need to complement these two data sources, we also make surveys, like collecting imagery with a GoPro camera and then updating the OpenStreetMap database based on this. Or we can do also surveys based on the Eurovelo methodology to determine what is the level of development of a certain route. So based on this data, we can also analyze the cyclability of the whole network, including cycleways, but including also all kinds of roads. The other issue is to determine the level of cycling. So this is probably what the guys in Lower Austria did before selecting which are the high potential areas. Here we also struggle sometimes with the lack of data. So what we have is the census data, which is good because they asked in the census where are you commuting for work or for school, and by what mode of mobility. So we have data from 2011 about how many people commute from one settlement to the other and how many of those are using the bicycle. But it's quite old, and we are now waiting for the data from the new census, which will be available later this year. The other opportunity which we used in Romania, where not even census data was available, to use the gravity model, so determine more or less judge the level of commuting by the population size of different settlements and by the distance between them. So the larger are the two settlements, and the shorter the distance between the two, the higher is probably the commuting need between the two. And also we need to take into account that cycling as a daily mode of mobility has some limitations in distance. So in this figure you can see that based on data from Csongrád County again, as the distance increases, the level of cycling decreases. So cycling is most popular on shorter distance if we talk about the daily mobility. So in this map from Timis County, you can see that for this utility cycling, mostly the agglomerations of the larger settlements have the highest potential. Then we have other data sources we can use. The first is mobile application data, which is useful, especially if you have applications which are already used by a lot of people. But here, for example, in this case, this heat map shows the most popular cycling routes in Budapest based on the Cycle to Route campaign. But in this case, you have to understand and take into account who are using or what kind of people are using this application and for what purpose, because it can distort the results. The other opportunity is to use a mapping questionnaire, which we did in different counties. So these maps in the bottom show that, for example, in Bács-Kiskun County, we asked people to put on a map which cycle routes they use in their daily trips and where do they think there would be some need for development in order to allow cycling. And based on that, we can establish this kind of heat maps and see which are the routes the most needed. The maps on the right side show the points of conflicts, so where they encounter different conflicts during cycling, and also a heat map generated from this. No surprise that it's especially the cities and high traffic roads which involve a lot of conflicts. So when planning the cycling networks, you probably know this principles and steps of cycling network planning. The Dutch have already established these principles for decades. We try to take them into account and plan networks which fulfill these conditions. And finally, the last methodological question is how to assess the potential projects or the sections of networks to be developed, how to prioritize them, because as everywhere, funding is limited also in Hungary, so we have to decide which sections are the most important or the most urgent to build. We have this list of different aspects which we take into account, and it depends on the county or the local stakeholders what is the weight of each factor. What is more important for them? Is it the potential for everyday mobility, or is it more the cycle tourism? And there are other factors also to take into account. For example, if there is already a paved road which is usable, or what is the level of car traffic at that specific section, what is the road safety situation, or how this a specific section matches the other development, or how does it fit into the different higher level plans. So this is an example from Timiș County in Romania on analyzing these different kind of factors. I don't want to go into the detail, but you can see that the different maps show different priorities depending on, for example, the daily mobility is very close to the big cities, or for leisure traffic it's much broader, because for leisure you can do a trip like 40 or 60 kilometers a day and not only like 5 or 10 kilometers, or the different network levels. And as a weighted average of these factors, we could prepare the priorities for this county network. So thank you for this, your attention. This was what I wanted to share with you today, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions if you have any.
Asi počas vašej práce ste komunikovali s viacerými účastníkmi, čo bolo najobťažnejšie, aký typ tých účastníkov pôsobí najväčšie problémy, ťažkosti.
As you can imagine, we have a lot of different stakeholders, so it depends also from region to region what is the dynamic between them. In some regions there is already an established cooperation, so for example they already have the channels of communication, they already gather time to time, and we can join this, so this is the easier case. In other cases we try to organize like workshops, for example, by micro-region, or with the more technical stakeholders like the national road company, or the railway company, or the water management companies. What is most challenging is also different. So in some cases, in Hungary we have many small municipalities, like every village has its own government, and some of them are quite they are really strongly pushing their interests, so it's not always easy to balance. This was maybe the essence of Dan's question to Mark's presentation about how you convince some villages that they are not on the priorities. But for example, in Romania, what is most complicated is the police, because the police is responsible for the traffic management or traffic permits or something. So you have to convince them that some solutions are safe, and it's not easy because they have like all the reflexes of what might be safe for driving mostly. So it's a challenge in all cases. Of course, we have like workshops, but we also use like online tools, but it's sometimes limited.
Takže to sú ďalšie veci. Samozrejme, že sú tam obmedzené možnosti. Ďakujem.
Antal, how many people are in your team?
Ľudí máš v tvojom týme, Antal? To je prvá otázka. Keď to zoberieme rok, aké sú jednotlivé míľniky vo vašich aktivitách smerom k regiónom alebo obciam? A koľko firiem vášho typu vyrastlo za niekoľko rokov už v Maďarsku? Ste len vy sami, alebo je tu priestor pre ďalších? A čo teda, ako by sa mohli od vás poučiť krajiny, ktoré nemajú také podobné firmy ako ste vy?
In our company we are 9 people. On the picture there was only 8, but we have a new colleague and we don't have a photo of him yet. Especially in terms of market, if we look at Austria, we see the potential, but we are a bit impatient about when this kind of boom will come. We hope that it will arrive. But we have many different kinds of companies in Hungary. There are really small ones, like one lead planner and some people around him, or even big planning companies, and we meet them at different tenders. We are quite special in terms that we are focusing on sustainable mobility, and this is not typical. So most of the other companies are ground up from like road planning or railway planning. So in this term, we are quite innovative or new on the market. And if I got your point right, our plans for the next year, or like generally in a year. Yeah. Yeah, basically we have different kinds of activities. One of them is this bicycle network planning, but it's one specific thing. We also work on public transport planning, like public transport networks and timetables for cities and regions. Again, in Hungary, but also in Romania and Bulgaria, we had projects on this. And we are also involved in European projects like Interreg Central Europe or Horizon Europe. So if any of you is looking for partners, we are ready to cooperate. So these are our main activities. We work from the very local level, like working in some small neighborhoods to improve the traffic situation, to the European level, which is really useful because we can look at what is done in Europe and try to transfer it to the local context, but also we try to somehow bring the experiences from the ground to the European level guidelines and policies. This is what we do. Did I answer all your questions?
Snažíme sa to zapracovať do našho prístupu, do našej politiky. Takže je to odpoveď na vašu otázku. Pokiaľ nemáme ďalšie otázky, tak ja by som položil asi poslednú. Vy ste sa zmienili o tom, že Maďarsko je tretia najcyklistickejšia krajina v Európe. Je to veľmi silná komunikačné posolstvo. Keď hovoríte s politikmi o trvalo udržateľnej mobilitike, je toto
I think the message is not strong yet enough, so it's not really recognized in a way. We have more of this traditional cycling, which is like it's very normal in these regions, but it's not really conscious or it's not really understood as a selling point. Like in the Netherlands, if you go to Velocity or some other conferences, they have like big stands. The Dutch Cycling Embassy, they sell their experience and they're really good. So it's we can't compete with them, but we still have to convince our politicians, even the ones. So, for example, our current minister is from this region to the southeast. So actually his city, where he was the mayor, is the most cycling city in Hungary. But still his understanding is like cycling is something for the leisure and maybe for those who can't afford a car, which are these really old-fashioned understandings, but we still have to convince this kind of decision makers or make cycling more trendy in a way and more
odráža aj v tomu, ako to dávajú priestor tomu